Hello, welcome back to this year's final episode of Square. Sorry if things are a bit disorganized. I am unloading into my new apartment and things are a mess. And my usual recording studio isn't really fully set up yet. And today we're going to look at the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. This included 4 installments to expand on the Final Fantasy VII universe, some of which were good to okay, others were a disaster. But could the recently announced HD remake debunk some of these as canon? I'll sit back and explain part of the reason why they had to deny it for 10 years until they finally announced the remake that everyone's been waiting for. First up on the list is a mobile title which was only released in Japan, called Before Crisis. Of course, which retells the exact same story of Crisis Core, which was pretty much another retelling of the OVA, The Last Order. So they thought the logical thing to do to continue the story after the end of FF7 would be to create a full-length CG movie called Advent Children. However, the story follows 2 years after the end of Final Fantasy VII, and Cloud is going through a lot of guilt over the deaths of his friends Zack and Eris. Following that time, a plague known as Geostigma has struck the population of the planet. Geostigma is of course carried by the deceased spirit of Sephiroth. However, the storyline would not be very good given continuity, which explains why they had to re-release an HD version called Advent Children Complete, which adds a few more scenes and not to confuse people, but it's a lot better. It suffers some of the serious flaws that the spirits within suffered, except unlike this one, it was based on an actual numbered installment. However, as mediocre as Advent Children was, it was a masterpiece compared to the next one coming up, Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. What's a dirge, you may ask? Well, a dirge is actually a piece of music typically played at a funeral march. It's a sort of requiem. And since Cerberus is the name of one of Vincent's weapon, putting those two together just wouldn't really make sense of the title and what this game's about. And the game is broken. It's absolute crap. This follows 3 years after the ending of Final Fantasy VII and 1 year after Advent Children, and Vincent, who no one really cared that much about, is the main hero. Because Square really wanted to be like Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 4, so they just turned what's been established as a classic JRPG into a generic third-person shooter. I mean, the RPG elements don't make it any better either. I mean, you can only carry a few materia at a time at the end of Vincent's weapon. And that just kills the gameplay right there. And given the story on this whole new characters that were just added to this universe, it just makes it even more confusing. I mean, say what you want about the sequels to Final Fantasy XIII, at least they filled in some of the gaps that was not in the original game. Here, this was completely unnecessary. In other words, maybe Vincent should have just crawled back into that coffin after the world was finally saved. And of course, the storyline is that Shinra has a secret force called Deep Ground and is trying to summon Omega Weapon to finally get rid of the planet. And the gameplay consists of shooting a bunch of generic enemies with the occasional boss until you progress to the point. Another point in the game. Rinse and repeat again. And judging by the amount of bugs and glitches that the original Japanese port had, you can really tell that this game was pretty rushed. I mean, they took out the multiplayer component, which no one gave a rat's ass about, out of the North America and PAL releases. Mainly because of how broken the game was at first. I'm sorry, Square, the damage had already been done, there's no fixing it. Which also made them really take their time on Crisis Core, which I will get to next. Even though it falls under the category of generic mediocrity, it makes it a whole lot better than those other two. Mainly because of its close resemblance to Kingdom Hearts, or the fact that we haven't really seen any good JRPGs recently around that time. In fact, I really think that this should be an OVA series instead of an entire game, because it spans the length of over 2 years, and it really surrounding the backstory of Cloud's Buster Sword, which of course many of you know was originally owned by Zack, who originally got it from his friend Angeal when he died. So it was originally owned by a boxer who didn't really want to use his sword and just carried it around for narcissistic purposes. In fact, I've got one thing to talk about this. Where the fuck was Genesis the entire game of FF7? I mean, if Genesis wasn't in the game of Final Fantasy VII, why couldn't they have just killed him off? Oh wait, it looks like they did! But that power was soon passed down to Sephiroth. Once he, of course, burned down the town during the Nibelheim incident and fell into the Mako reactor. As explained a million times before. So, with this side story being quickly swept under the rug and really only enjoyed by hardcore fans like myself, that was only a brief period. Should there really be an HD remaster, or should this just be converted to an OVA? And this concludes this year's Squaretember. This is Maranama, signing off.